In this video, I'm going to be showing you all of the controls and tips that I know for the precision build mode. This is something that's really useful to make super detailed rides or scenery, and it's what people like Benji's Adventures use to make their parks looking super good. But it is not the most intuitive thing in the world, so I'm just making a quick little guide to show all of the controls. Most of the time, what you're going to be using with the precision build mode is these primitive pieces. There's a huge amount of them in this last tab of the scenery window. You can also use it with quite a few other pieces from any of the other scenery tabs. The very first thing to get into is how to turn it on. As you can see down here, you need to have disable collisions enabled. This does require the disable collisions game pass, and then this button right here is the precision build mode. If you click on it, you can turn it on. It will be enabled. Nothing will change immediately, but if you place an item, as you can see, it will create these rings around it, these arrows, and for some items, these little squares as well. These arrows will allow you to move the object on any of these three axes, up, down, left, right, or forward, backward. The rings will allow you to rotate it, like so. And then the squares, if they are present, will allow you to scale the item. Many primitives will allow you to scale it in multiple directions, but some objects, such as cylinders, will scale it in multiple directions even if you're moving only one square. Another thing to note with this scaling tool is that there are some minimum sizes for objects. Not all objects have the same minimum or maximum sizes. For a lot of things like the regular cuboids, you can get them about 5 blocks long, and the smallest sizes can be pretty small, up to maybe a 1/16 of a block or so. And then there's one last control I actually forgot to mention for when you are editing the size of a piece. If you hold shift and move one of these squares, it will move both sides of the piece at the same exact time. The next control to get into is right next to the precision build mode. We have the move and rotation snapping. Both of these just change what grid you're moving stuff on. As you can see, I can only move this cube between these two positions, but if I change the snapping grid down to say a quarter, it'll have 4 times as many places to snap between as you move it. And of course, you can also put it to no snapping to have complete freedom over where you place the object. And then you can enter any value into custom snapping. Some that I use a lot of the time are 0.125, which is 1/8 snapping, or 0.0625, which is 1/16. The same exact thing goes for the rotation. If I change it to 11.25, you can rotate it a lot more freely, and obviously no snapping will give you completely free rotation. Some custom snapping I use a lot is 30 and 15 degrees, which are a 12th and 24th full circle. Another thing to note with these snapping grids is that they also exist when you're placing things manually, but this will be split into horizontal and vertical grid snapping and will change. For example, this is a 1/2 grid, but if I place it, I will go back to the 1/8 grid. And then one last thing to note with the movement, if I place this down, as you can see, I can move this in any of these 3 directions. And if I rotate it, then as you can see, the arrows will also change. So I'm moving it in the same direction, left and right, relative to the block, but now it's at a different angle relative to the rest of the park. You can see this a little bit more clearly with an on-grid block placed right here. I can move it in these directions relative to this block. However, if I hit J, or go down here and go and switch to transformation space, now these arrows will be relative to the world. So I will now be moving it at a different angle relative to this block. And this can be very, very useful if you want to have something that is slanted that you're copy pasting sideways. And then of course, some very useful keybinds, the most useful being G to just place, or of course you can press this confirm button down here. Now I'm going to exit out of that menu and we're going to go and look at some of the stuff down here. Obviously this is a primitive, so you can change its material and color, but that's normal. You can also destroy it, or cut, or copy this object. If you just cut by pressing this button or pressing Control X, it will give you the object to be placed down elsewhere. But for example, if I scale this object up and then place it, and now if I go to cut, it will just give me the regular square again. Copy works pretty much the same way. If I click this, it will give me the same object, but just as the default square. The difference between cut and copy is that cut will delete the object that you're copying before you copy it, and copy will leave it there and you'll just get to copy it. But neither of these directly keep the scaling or some other properties of the original piece. What you can do instead is use shift at the same time while pressing Control or Command and X to cut the object and then go directly into precision build mode. This shortcut does not work on mobile, but if you have precision build mode enabled, then using the cut button will automatically go into this precision build mode. Obviously the same thing, exact thing works. If I hit Control-Shift-C, it will copy it into precision build mode. Another thing you can do here is just use the picker tool and hold Shift while clicking on an item. It will do the exact same thing as copying and going directly into precision build mode. Let's say I'd spent hours placing down these two squares and a circle, and I wanted to place them somewhere else, but I didn't want to have to build this exact thing all over again. Well, there's some very useful buttons you can press. If you're on mobile, you can just go down to this hand right here, press this, and you can just choose which one of these you want to use. You can obviously also use this on PC. For example, if I go to multi-select mode, I can select one thing and then select another thing. It'll say I've selected 2 items and I get an extra control here. But you also have the key binds of Command or Control to go into multi-select mode and Shift to go into a box select mode that lets you select multiple things by drawing a box around them. You can also combine the two. Once you have your things selected, you can go to this button down here and group them. Grouped items, if you click on them, are going to all be selected once you group them, and all stay if you copy or cut them. You can also place them all together, of course. Now that I've covered most of those basic controls, I'm going to get into a couple extra tricks. Most of these are only going to be possible to do on PC, but everything else in this video, as far as I know, is possible to do on mobile. So if I go to this piece right here and I copy it, and then let's just say I move it over here, I rotate it a little bit, but then I realize I actually want it to be back at the same spot as this piece. You can just middle click on it and it will teleport it directly there. As you can see, it snapped the rotation and the position of this piece that I'm editing to the piece I middle clicked on, but it will not change the scale. An interesting thing to note is that this will not teleport the middle of the object directly to the middle of the other object. As you can see, this sphere, I will middle click here, and the middle of this sphere is not at the middle of this block. For most primitives, there is a position that is at the bottom of the piece. As you can see, that's sort of marked by this blue rectangle or square under this sphere. And if I click here, it will also go to the bottom of this primitive. Now, probably the most useful tool for making some things like circles, arches, or stairs is relative move and rotate, which is not the exact same thing as this transformation space. As you can see, if I bring this circle out a little bit and I place it, I can then shift and middle click on this piece, and it will keep the circle here, which you may not be able to fully tell because I did place it, but it is there. If I scale it up, you can see it is still there, but it will move the movement and rotation pieces over to here. So that means that if I use these rotation rings here, it will rotate the object I'm editing around the object I set as the rotation reference. So as you can see, I can move it around like this, and then if I just place it at each of these positions, I can make a very, very easy circle, just like that. Another thing you can also do is use the relative move. In this case, it's going to look exactly the same, but let me set something up where it will be a little bit different. So let's say that I'm trying to build a staircase. Obviously, one way to do that would just be to move this piece over a little bit and then move it up, and then place it, and then move it over and move it up. Oh, but now it's starting to drift away from this piece because this is at a 45-degree angle, and I was moving those at a 45-degree. So I guess I'll just move it over again, but now the stairs look weird, and the spacing is a little inconsistent. What you can do instead is simply shift and then middle click on this piece. And then for this, you do want to make sure you're in the transformation space relative. And now if I just move this up and down, I can place everything exactly at the same position relative to this side of where the stairs are. And you get smooth, evenly spaced stairs very, very easily. So now I'm going to try to use pretty much all of those tricks to create a pretty simple custom tree using primitives. I'm going to start here with one of these cylinders, scale that down to be a much smaller tree trunk size, and then I'm going to scale it up to be about as tall as I want this tree to be. Then I'm going to change this rotation snapping to be 22.5 degrees so I can rotate this to the side to get a root. And then I'll move that very precisely into place using no snapping grid. Of course, it is possible to rotate this manually and get this into a position to make another root without the relative rotation. But a much easier way to do that is to copy that and then rotate it around the tree trunk. Really quickly, I'm just going to color this so far. That's looking a lot more like a tree. And then I can make some tree branches using a pretty similar technique. Setting these to 0 snapping for a little more precision. And then of course extending out this branch, holding multi-select to get both of these, and then copying that and rotating it around the tree. and then making sure I'm on global space so I can just move it down a little bit, or up actually. This one I'm just going to make a little bit smaller using the multi-scale. Now I can get a cuboid to make the leaves out of, snap that directly to the middle, and move it up. After scaling that down and moving it just a little bit, I think I can place in a few of these. I'm going to switch to relative space for this, copying this over to the other two branches. And then of course I'm just going to shrink this down a tiny bit more so I can fill in some of the empty spots. Now all I need to do is paint these some kind of green. Now that that's complete, I'm going to hold Shift, select everything. Looks like it didn't quite get the roots. I'm just going to hold Control or Command and click on all of these to pick them up as well. And then press this group button right here. Now again, I can Command or Control Shift C to move this over, rotate it, and place a bunch of these down. And that is all I have for this video. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. It's very possible I got something wrong or missed a detail. And if you enjoyed, make sure you like and subscribe and check out some of my other videos. Now that you know how to use the precision build mode, get to making some really cool, really detailed builds.